Let's get into some serious issues. As a futurist, you're monitoring trends in our changing world. You're in London. What are the sorts of things you're coming to observe and thinking about what might be ahead of us in the decade ahead?
Well, right off the top, I think I can give you three things, and skipping through the details, but three major things that I think will affect Australia as they do much of the world. The first one is the blurring of the line increasingly between humanity and technology. That's going to continue apace in the next 5 or 10 years. A push for more and more sophisticated artificial intelligence and eventually artificial general intelligence is going to bring a mix of benefits, healthcare and education, for example, along with challenges. Things like jobs will be affected. We'll see human implants augmenting human skills with inbuilt tech devices such as brain implants. That's going to be much more common in Australia than it would be right now. And that raises important ethical questions about the line between humanity and technology, for example. What does it mean fundamentally to be human? I think a second thing we're going to see in a big way is a further digitization of the human experience. So the raison d'etre of big tech companies is encouraging us to create mountains of data which they can collate, analyze, and monetize. I think we all know that now. So we'll continue to see efforts to bring more and more of the human experience under that digital umbrella. More of what we do will be done online even than it is today. And that, of course, contributes to the push for the cashless economy, which will pick up pace in the next 5 years. Already we're seeing a growth in digital debt because people are spending using cashless systems. We're spending more with less forethought. You don't have to think as much when you're just wiping a card. And of course, there's the problem of data outages. Things like CrowdStrike come along and affect online services worldwide, and we can't access our money. And the third one I'd cite right off the top is a deepening identity crisis, a deepening of our sense of lack when it comes to fundamental meaning. I was asked a while ago in Berlin, what is the plague of our time? This was pre-COVID. But even post-COVID, I would answer the same way. The long-lasting plague of our time is fluidity. Nothing's certain anymore. Even the most basic characteristics of life, including our definitions of gender, are subject to debate and alteration. So there's almost no fixed moral or cultural points of reference. And linked to that is a meaning deficit. You may remember that the psychotherapist Viktor Frankl said people can endure a great deal of pain provided there's a purpose in the pain. And today we've got people in Australia, as we do in Britain and America, suffering inner or existential pain because there's no purpose in it. They don't feel any purpose or meaning in it. And we see the effects of that in our falling levels of public trust in foundational institutions. In the last 15 years, every institution in society has been held up and found wanting. Governments, police, courts, health and education authorities, even the institutional church. And that decline in trust is, of course, partly because institutions have not lived up to their promise. But it's also, I think, because we have unrealistic expectations of them and will continue to do that. Because we've lost any shared religious foundation, we've come to expect too much from society's leaders and institutions. We look to them to project a sense of purpose into our communities and lives, and they're not equipped to do that. And of course, for some people in Australia, as here, and this will continue, the lack of meaning is being filled by things like cultural Marxism or woke ideology, as it's called, and for others, even more so, by technological utopianism. And some people treat texts like AI with something close to reverence. They hope that technology will release us from a kind of meaningless life and give us purpose. So there's just three things right up the top that will shape in some way the culture in the next 5 to 10 years.
Three things that I'm going to point listeners to explore some more at the end of our conversation when I say how you can connect with Mal Fletcher. But Mal, let's just stop and pause to reflect for a moment on what all of this means, because as you talk about fluidity, as you talk about the change that is not only coming, it's upon us right now. I know you use some terminology that you call that we are facing a psycho-emotional challenge. these things might indicate that we're not ready for the emotional impact of what AI and what machine language and these technological developments are going to have upon us. But is there something in each one that is going to be left out to dry or left adrift on an ocean, as you say, nowhere to anchor to? Is this going to cause us all sorts of challenges in our own emotional makeup?
Yes, I think it will, particularly if we have no foundation that is larger than technology, larger than ideology. And this, for me, in my case as a futurist, that fundamental foundation happens to be my Christian faith. Now, I don't appear on mainstream media to preach my faith. I'm there to speak about issues, but the worldview behind my interpretation is definitely a Judeo-Christian worldview. Not all Christians would agree with it. I'm not speaking for a particular constituency, but I am speaking out of my understanding of Christian worldview. And it's very important to have, as I said, that sense of meaning based in something bigger than the institutions of society or even the culture of society. Culture really is just defined as an expression of what is normal here. So the things that we value, the things that we prioritize, they are expressions of culture. They are what forms our culture. But at the root of every culture is a cult. And we use that word in the sociological sense to mean a system of beliefs about something bigger than we are. And when cultures begin to cut themselves off from their central cult, their sense of spiritual worldview, then we have some of the problems we have today with identity, meaning, and what it means to be human. And that last one, by the way, is the big one we will face increasingly as technology plays a bigger and bigger part of our lives. So yes, there's an emotional component, but it comes down, I think, to the level of soul and the spiritual component of what it means to be human.
I'm led to think that oftentimes there'll be a lot of Christian believers who are holding their faith very lightly, who are in a shallow end of the pool, and the thought that there needs to be a deepening or a strengthening of that faith, a strengthening of an appreciation of the transcendence of God or the foundations of our faith. Is this a way to prepare for some of the challenges that might be ahead? When we're talking about the changing technology and how we deal with it, how do you think we do that preparation in getting a little bit more deeper or more substantial with our faith?
Well, it's a good question, and something I've been dealing with churches and Christian leaders for some time now is what I call the theology of technology. We have to become, in order to become data literate, that is to understand how data operates, how data is analyzed, who has control of that process. We need to first, as Christians, become biblically literate. We need to understand the principles, the basic principles of the Christian scriptures that we can apply to technology. So whilst digital tech is not in the scriptures, for example, certainly there are issues relating to humanity that are outlined there. For example, the very first book of the Bible, Genesis, in the very first chapter and second chapter also reminds us that we are created in the image of God. We bear an imprint of something bigger than ourselves, which is why we thirst for the transcendent in the first place. And as a result of that, we should be able to say, well, technology can be honoring to God, but we must keep it in its place. Technology is a good servant and a poor master. We're created in the image of God. Technology is created by us. So the line between humanity and technology will in some ways never be crossed because there's part of us made in the image of God that doesn't cross over into the world of the machine. So when we have some understanding of basic theology based in the scriptures, we're much better able to take into account things like the human impact of emerging technologies.
So when you've got almost innumerable amounts of data available, some of that converts to knowledge, but the component of wisdom, that's something that is different to data-generated knowledge, isn't it? When we're talking about having a Christian worldview, of appreciating those principles theologically, is this where the wisdom is going to be mined that will help us to get through the difficult times ahead?
Yes, well, I was saying to a group of technology people recently that an abundance of data does not equate to uh, a superfluity of wisdom, because wisdom is the ability to apply data in righteous or good ways. And according to the scriptures, wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And what I take that to mean is that it's nothing to do with age, by the way, or experience. Wisdom is something to do with the heart's inclination towards our Creator. And if we start out with the right inclination towards our Creator, as we age and have experiences, we will add to that wisdom. But if we start out with the wrong inclination, we won't necessarily build up our database or our collection of wisdom over time. So I think it starts with a heart's inclination to God, and we find God represented most in the scriptures. This is where we learn how to make God's name great, because we understand his character, his the way he does things, why he does them that way, at least to some degree. In some ways, he's inscrutable. He's God after all. But we can get a handle on some of the things God does and the way he does them. And that helps us then to apply data in ways that are righteous, because God is righteous.
Mal, there's an old saying, it comes from Solomon in the Old Testament, the author of the book of Ecclesiastes, renowned to be very wise. He says there's nothing new under the sun. So with what's coming upon us, artificial intelligence, machine learning, this abundance of data and knowledge, I wonder if you've got any thoughts here around the idea that there might be different platforms, but humanity is still the same. There's still a dark side. There's still a sinful nature. How does that equate to with what's coming ahead of us?
Well, there are issues that recur cyclically through history because they relate essentially to expressions of human aspiration or human angst. So, if you look back at history, and I don't think you can be a futurist without having a desire and a thirst for knowledge about history. There are challenges throughout history with access to meaningful work. There are problems throughout history with personal security. There are problems throughout history with poverty and challenges with national threats and natural threats like droughts. But there are, I think, at least three factors that mark out our times as being different. One is high mobility. Humans have always moved about, but in our time, mobility is part of the very fabric of life, even in developing countries. The second one is what you touched on there, sophisticated near-global technologies. We've always had tools, but today we're uniquely incorporating our tools even into our bodies. And the third one is I touched on before, the high levels of fluidity, the plague of our time. And I think we need to get to the point, and certainly Christians in media have a role to play here, in the face of rampant change. When we look at the present and future of Australia, we can't afford to throw up our hands in resignation on the basis that everything is as it always has been. And nor should we, as Christians, allow our eschatology, our belief about end times, for example, to make us escapist. We must take responsibility to challenge the status quo and point the way to something better, which we believe is the kingdom of God. So in Solomon's case, the case you're citing, the phrase nothing new under the sun is a cry of futile resignation. The whole book of Ecclesiastes, from which this saying comes, it's the only book that doesn't say much about God. It's essentially about the futility of life if we see things only on the horizontal or human plane, without any vertical reference point. So as Christians, we have a role to play in reinstituting a vertical Godward perspective on life alongside the important horizontal human-focused outlook. So something new under the sun is a cry of resignation. And I'm not anxious to be using that phrase because I think it suggests something that I don't want to go into. I don't want to be resigned. I want to be able to proactively change things by the grace of God.
Well, there's a number of platforms, and we'll often be talking about the church. We'll be talking about the Bible and the way we engage with the Bible. Just to pick up on the fact that you've mentioned Christian media and organisations like Vision Christian Media, Vision Christian Radio. The sort of impact that Christian media makes on the ability for people to navigate a way forward, How do you think that is going to be important in the years to come?
I think it'll be very important, particularly as media generally, first of all, has to deal with the outcomes of increased digitization. There are entire radio stations in this country, in the UK and throughout Europe, that are completely robotized now. You can walk the hallways and essentially the playlist is happening without any human interaction. It's a bit like Industry 4.0, where machines run the factories themselves. So we're seeing sort of media 4.0 starting to emerge. I think the human element will be very important, and Christian media can play an important role here in keeping humans involved, making sure that we don't over-automate what we do, because machines, there's one thing they can't do. They can't empathize. Empathy requires a shared human experience, which by definition, a machine can't have. So we need to make sure that we have a therapeutic or empathic element in almost everything we do in media these days in order to protect that human role, which we believe as Christians to be the primary decider of what happens on the planet Earth under God. I think also there's the element of promoting community, which I know people like Vision Australia are very much into, and I applaud that. Because of tribalism today, which is a response in some ways to globalization and migration, it's not always a positive tribalism. Sometimes it is, though. Sometimes people are simply looking for other people who think like them. It's nothing to do with race or anything else. It's just, I want to find people who think like me, people who share my values. And there are not many opportunities in society today to do that. When you go online, you're directed by algorithms towards things you already find acceptable. You're not able to have those wonderful, surprising moments when you discover someone you didn't even know about who might share common values and have slightly different ideas that you can learn from. So there's reduced social capital in our society as a result of digitization. There's an increase in a positive form of tribalism. And I think people are looking more and more for community in an age of disenfranchisement and fragmentation. And Christian media can play an important role in building a sense of tribe, first of all with listeners, within the church and without the church, because we're not called just to reach the church, are we? We're called to reach outside and have influence of a positive kind. And I think that role that Vision and others are playing is vital in terms of building the sense of positive tribe, positive community.
Let me just say a special congratulations to you. You were honoured at the recent Christian Media and Arts Conference here in Australia as the Legacy Award winner for 40 years of media innovation. I know you were privileged to be recognised that way, but just hearing from you, how did you feel about that recognition?
Oh, look, it was most unexpected. For one thing, when I received the email from Nathan Brown of CMAA, I was quite surprised, but it meant a lot to me because, first of all, it's from people I respect and it comes from my homeland. I've been out of Australia now for 30-something years in Europe, working across Europe, based in the UK now. So it was so good to feel that connection again. I've been with your conference a couple of times, but it was so nice to feel appreciated for the work we've done in media. So thank you to CMAA again.
For listeners to connect with, Mal Fletcher, who's the founder and chairman of 2030 Plus. He's a respected keynote speaker, a social commentator, and you might want to read some more and get some more detail about the sorts of things we've only been able to touch on in this conversation. This is the website you go to, 2030plus.com. That's the number 2030 and the word plus.com. Mal Fletcher, I want to say thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy schedule to talk to listeners today here on 2020.
It's been a pleasure. Let's do it again sometime. Have a great day.